Ever feel like you're drowning in information about making sure your software is top-notch?
Yeah, it can be overwhelming.
Let's cut through the noise and get to the heart of it.
Sounds good to me.
Today, we're going deep on test management, especially planning and control.
Those are the things that really give you an edge.
Exactly. It's about going from just reacting to problems
Right.
to really taking charge of quality from the start.
Yeah, understanding why some software launches go so smoothly.
And others, well.
Not so much.
Okay, so we're diving into test management, specifically planning and control. What's the goal here? What do we want our listeners to walk away with?
I think the main thing is to give them a really solid understanding of how to create those test plans that work,
Yeah.
and to use risk-based testing to make sure that the software they're putting out there is high quality.
Right.
We want them to see how this all fits together.
So why can't we just dive in and start testing? Why is managing this whole process so important?
Well, there are a few really key reasons. First, it brings structure to the whole thing. Instead of just testing things randomly,
Right.
you have a systematic approach.
Makes sense.
And that really helps minimize the chances of big problems slipping through the cracks.
You mean those bugs that really hit users hard?
Exactly. Those ones that cause all those headaches.
And support tickets.
Yeah, exactly. And the third reason is that good test management means you're using your resources wisely.
Right. Like time, budget, and all the expertise on the team.
Right. You don't want to waste any of that.
Definitely not.
Fourth, it gives you traceability. You can connect the dots between what the software was supposed to do and what you've actually tested.
So you can see the whole picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And finally, it makes communications so much better between everyone involved. Everyone's on the same page about quality.
Makes sense. So let's break it down. What is test management in simple terms?
Well, it's basically the whole process of planning, running, and overseeing all the testing activities in a software project. The goal is to make sure that the software meets the standards and expectations.
Okay, that makes sense. So you've got these two main parts, planning and control. What's the main difference between those?
Think of test planning like the blueprint. You do it before you even start testing.
Gotcha.
You're defining what you want to achieve, what you're going to test, and your strategy for testing. You figure out who's going to do what tools you need, and how long it's all going to take.
Okay, so it's setting the stage for success.
Exactly. Now, test control is what you do while the testing is actually happening. You're making sure that everything is going according to plan, you're tracking progress, identifying any problems, and making adjustments as needed.
So you're staying flexible.
Right. You have to be ready to adapt.
That makes sense. So when we talk about test planning, what are the really important things we need to focus on?
Well, there are a few key things. First, you absolutely have to define the scope and objectives.
Yeah.
That means what parts of the software are you testing, and what are you hoping to learn from those tests?
Makes sense.
Then you've got to think about your resources and schedule. Who's doing the testing, when are they doing it, and how long is it going to take?
Time and people.
Always important.
Always.
Then you have to think about the test deliverables. These are the documents, the test cases, the data, the reports, basically all the stuff that comes out of your testing process.
Right. So you have records of everything.
Exactly. And don't forget about the test environment setup. You have to make sure that you have the right hardware, the right software, the right network, everything you need to actually run your tests.
That's a lot to consider.
It is, but it's all really important.
Okay, so that's all about setting up the plan. What about test control? What does that look like in practice?
Well, it's a continuous process. It starts as soon as you begin testing. You're constantly monitoring your progress using different metrics and reports. You track things like how many tests you've run, how many defects you've found, and how you're doing against your schedule.
So you always have a sense of where you are.
Right. And you have to be good at managing defects. That means logging every issue, tracking its status, and making sure it gets fixed.
Okay.
You also need to be aware of any risks that might come up and have plans in place to deal with them.
So you're always prepared.
As much as possible. And you have to be flexible enough to change your plan if things change.
So if something unexpected happens...
You can adjust.
I see. Can you give us an example of how good planning and control actually affect the quality of the software?
Sure. Let's say you have a team that doesn't plan very well.
Okay.
They might just start testing without really knowing what they're looking for or what they're trying to achieve.
Right.
They might waste time testing the same things twice or miss important areas altogether.
Makes sense.
And when they do find problems, it's often late in the game when it's really expensive and time-consuming to fix them.
So you end up with buggy software that's delayed.
Exactly. Now imagine a team that has a really good plan. They know exactly what they need to test, how they're going to do it, and what success looks like.
They're organized.
Right. They use their resources efficiently, track their progress carefully, and identify risks early on.
So they can fix problems before they become huge.
Exactly. And that means they can deliver higher quality software on time and on budget.
Okay, that's a great contrast. So let's talk more about creating a test plan. You said it's like a roadmap. Why is having a test plan document so important?
Well, it keeps everyone on the same page. The whole team and anyone else involved knows what's being tested, how it's being tested, and what the goals are.
That's important.
And it helps you track your progress and show what you've done to make sure the software is good.
Okay, so what are the must-have parts of a really strong test plan?
If you look at the standards from ISTQB, which is a well-respected organization in software testing,
Right.
they recommend including a few key sections.
Okay, what are those?
First, you need a test plan identifier. It's just a unique label so you can easily refer to the document.
Simple enough.
Then you need an introduction. It explains the purpose of the test plan and what you're trying to achieve.
Right, the basics.
Then there's a section for test items. This is where you list all the specific parts of the software that you're going to test.
Like particular features or modules.
Exactly. And then crucially, you need a scope and out of scope section. This defines exactly what will be tested and what won't be tested.
So it's like setting boundaries.
It is. It prevents things from spiraling out of control and makes sure everyone knows what to expect.
I see.
Next, you have the test approach, which describes your overall testing strategy.
Okay.
You'll talk about the different levels of testing you'll be doing, like unit testing, integration testing, system testing, and acceptance testing.
Wow, there are a lot of different types of testing.
There are. You'll also describe the specific techniques you'll be using.
Right, so how you're actually going to do the testing.
Exactly. Then you have the test environment section. This is where you specify all the hardware and software that you need to run your tests.
So making sure you have the right tools.
Right. Then you have the roles and responsibilities section, which assigns specific tasks to different people on the team.
Okay, so everyone knows what they're doing.
Right. The schedule and milestones section lays out the timeline for the testing, including important deadlines.
So you can track your progress.
Exactly. Then there are the entry and exit criteria. This defines when you start and stop testing for a particular phase.
So you know when a phase is complete.
Exactly. You also have the risks and contingencies section, which identifies potential problems that could arise during testing and how you plan to address them.
Always good to be prepared.
And finally, there's a section for test deliverables. This lists all the documents, reports, and other things that will be produced during testing.
So you have a record of everything.
Exactly.
Wow. That is a comprehensive plan.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like the level of detail can really vary depending on the project, though.
It can. And there are different types of test plans depending on what you need.
Oh, really? Can you give us some examples?
Sure. A master test plan gives you a high-level overview of all the testing activities for the entire project.
Okay, so it's like the big picture.
Right. Then you might have level-specific test plans, which focus on a particular type of testing, like unit testing or system testing.
So you can really get into the details of each level.
Exactly. And you might also have phase-specific test plans, which focus on a specific stage of testing, like regression testing or security testing.
So it depends on what you're trying to achieve at that point in the project.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. So how can we make sure that these test plans are actually useful and not just documents that get filed away?
That's a good question. There are a few best practices that can help.
Like what?
First, talk to your stakeholders early and often. Get their input on the test plan.
Okay.
Make sure everyone agrees on what needs to be tested and what the goals are. Second, make your test plan flexible. Things change in software development, so your plan needs to be able to change too.
Be ready to adapt.
Absolutely. Third, use historical data to inform your planning. Look at what's worked well in the past and what hasn't.
Learn from experience.
Exactly. And finally, make sure you can trace every test case back to a specific requirement. This shows that you've tested everything that needs to be tested.
Okay, those are all really helpful tips. Now let's talk about risk-based testing. What is it and why is it so important these days?
So risk-based testing, or RBT for short, is a way of prioritizing your testing efforts based on how risky different parts of the software are.
I see. So you focus more on the areas that are most likely to have problems.
Exactly. And the areas where problems would have the biggest impact.
Okay, that makes sense. But why is this approach so important now?
Well, software development is moving faster than ever these days.
It is.
And there's a lot of pressure to release software quickly. But you still have to make sure that the software is good.
Absolutely.
So risk-based testing helps you focus your limited time and resources on the most critical areas.
So you get the most bang for your buck, so to speak.
Exactly. You find the most important problems early on when they're easier and cheaper to fix.
Okay, I see the value in that. So when we talk about risks in software testing, what are we really talking about?
There are two main types of risks, product risks and project risks.
What's the difference?
Product risks are things that could go wrong with the software itself, like bugs, security vulnerabilities, or performance issues.
So things that affect how well the software works.
Right. Project risks are things that could go wrong with the testing process itself.
Okay.
Like not having enough time, not having enough people, or having requirements that keep changing.
Oh, so things that can make it harder to do the testing properly.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we actually put risk-based testing into practice? What are the steps?
Well, first you need to identify the potential risks. You look at the requirements, the design, and the actual software to see where things could go wrong.
I see.
Then you assess each risk. How likely is it to happen? And how bad would it be if it did happen?
So you're thinking about the probability and the impact.
Right. Then you prioritize the risks. High-risk areas get more attention.
Okay.
You might run more tests on those areas or use more sophisticated testing techniques.
So you're really focusing your efforts where they matter most.
Exactly. And then you keep monitoring the risks throughout the project. Things can change, so you need to be ready to adjust your plan.
So it's an ongoing process.
It is.
Can you give us an example of how this would work in a real project?
Sure. Let's say you're testing a website that sells things online.
Okay.
The parts of the website that handle payments and orders are going to be high risk.
Right, because if those go wrong, people could lose money.
Exactly, and it could damage the company's reputation.
Definitely.
So you'd spend more time and effort testing those areas than you would, say, testing the layout of the product pages.
Okay, that makes sense. So what are some ways to systematically assess these risks?
There are a few techniques you can use. One is called failure mode and effects analysis, or FMEA.
What's that?
It's a step-by-step process for identifying potential failures and figuring out how to prevent them.
Okay.
Another technique is to use risk matrices. These are basically charts that help you visualize the probability and impact of different risks.
So you can see which risks are the most important.
Exactly. You can also use historical data, look at problems that have come up in past projects.
So you can avoid making the same mistakes twice.
Right.
So risk-based testing isn't a one-time thing. It's something you do throughout the project. How does it work with Agile and DevOps?
That's a good point. In Agile, you're constantly reassessing the risks as you go.
Right, because things change so quickly.
Exactly. And in DevOps, you're trying to build quality in from the start.
So risk-based testing is part of that process.
It is. You want to find and fix problems as early as possible.
Makes sense. What are some of the challenges people face with risk-based testing?
Well, one challenge is that risk assessment can be subjective.
Right. Different people might see the same risk differently.
Exactly. So it's important to have clear criteria for assessing risks and to involve a diverse group of people in the process.
So you get a variety of perspectives.
Right. Another challenge is that requirements often change in Agile and DevOps.
Yes, they do.
So you have to be ready to update your risk assessment as things change.
Makes sense.
And sometimes you might run into resistance from people who are used to doing things the old way.
So they might not be on board with risk-based testing.
Right. In those cases, it's important to explain the benefits of risk-based testing and show how it can improve the quality of the software.
So education is key.
It is.
This has been a great discussion. To sum up, what are the key takeaways about test planning and control?
Well, I think the most important thing is to remember that test planning and control are essential for ensuring the quality of your software.
They're not just extra steps.
Right. They're crucial parts of the process. A good test plan gives you a roadmap, and good test control keeps you on track.
And risk-based testing helps you focus your efforts on the most important areas.
Exactly. By using these techniques, you can deliver software that meets the needs of your users and your business.
So for our listeners out there, think about how you can start using risk-based testing in your own projects.
Yeah, it's a really valuable approach.
And if you want to learn more about best practices, check out ISTQB.
They have a lot of great resources.
And before we wrap up, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Okay.
Software development is constantly evolving.
It is.
So how do you think test management will need to change in the future to keep up?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it's something to ponder.
It is.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to all our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this deep dive on test management. We hope you found it helpful.
And keep testing.
Until next time.
See you then.